Thanks so much for joining me in the next episode of this series where I am diving into an alternative to key switching, how we can use channel switching, MIDI CC switching in Dorico. My example here is relying on VE Pro and also Berlin Free Orchestra for the main reasons that I think these are relatively commonplace in the workflows for many of the people watching this video. But if any of them are new to you and you have questions along the way, always feel free to ask me questions. In today's video, we're going to be looking at a percussion map and a percussion ensemble, which is a slightly different approach to what we've covered so far, where we've looked at building endpoints for strings, winds, and brass. Now, an endpoint is essentially going to be the Dorico sort of terminology for a file that connects instruments with maps, expression maps, percussion maps, as well as port configurations, things like that. So how MIDI is being directed. That information is all stored together in an endpoint. And then a playback template brings together multiple endpoints. And one of the things that I had mentioned earlier in this series is that you can, to clarify, what I'm about to say is really a reason why I'm doing things the way that I am. You can build an endpoint per instrument, right? So you got one for your viola, one for your cello. Then you go and you get the Cremona quartet and you build out your Stradivari violin and your Stradivari cello and all that. And then you go and get CSS and you build out an endpoint for this and that and this. And then, it's a never-ending list of to-dos. There are so many libraries out there. I thought there's got to be a better way. And there were a number of problems I wanted to solve. First, I wanted to find a way to write an expression map that could be used in the vast majority of instruments, so that instead of having to rewrite the expression map, I just need to configure the instrument to work with my expression map. Okay, so it's a little bit flipping the ideology on its head to achieve a different result, which is that I write an expression map I know works, and then I configure the instrument to work with it. And I've found this actually very, very flexible, very powerful. As I also have mentioned in previous videos, this model of using instruments for ports requires that you can work with MIDI ports. In my experience, Vienna Ensemble Pro or VE Pro is the best way to distribute instruments across different ports. If there's another way that you're doing, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're trying to work out a different approach, I'll do my best to help you solve that problem. Just leave a question in the comments. But I'm using VE Pro for that reason. I also have mentioned in past videos that MIDI CC values cannot be used to switch articulations in every library. Now here I'm using Berlin Free Orchestra in the Sign player from Orchestral Tools, and that does support MIDI CC switching. I think so does CSS, Cinematic Studios, so do many of the Spitfire libraries. But the Cremona quartet, for example, from Native Instruments, does not support MIDI CC switching. So this approach is more limited when I work with those libraries, and I tend not to work with the libraries, honestly, for that reason, unfortunately. Let's get back to the essentials here. I want to focus on building out a percussion map and look at a basic percussion setup using Berlin Free Orchestra. Now, the Berlin Free Orchestra, if I bounce into my desktop view here, let's just look at what's available. So I'm going to bounce up to my instance. This is my VE Pro instance for BFO for Berlin Free Orchestra Percussion. Okay. And I've got 3 channels set up here. I've got bass drum, snare, and suspended cymbal. Each one has its own port. Each one has its own audio output pair, and the channels are set to all. Okay, so what's on each one of these channels? Well, on the bass drum channel, you can see that I've got their drums group. And here I'm not using MIDI CC switching for percussion. That's not really appropriate for percussion and percussion maps. I only use MIDI CCs for the other instrument families like strings, winds, and brass, where you have multiple articulations. Then you have snare. I'm also running essentially drums. Now, the fact that I have 2 Sign player instances loaded up, but they have both loaded the same group of drums, means there's no big RAM imprint. In other words, having a channel for bass drum and a channel for snare, even though they've loaded the exact same samples, that's just one memory allocation. It doesn't double the amount of memory, which is really nice. It allows me to keep things orderly in my instance here, as long as I'm using Sign Player. Certainly Contact has similar features. As long as you're using all Contact instances, it does a really good job of managing memory and optimizing those things. But for suspended cymbal, I'm not using drums. I'm using unpitched metals. Okay, so let's take a look at what's available in the percussion just to get a starting point here. Again, this is the Berlin Free Orchestra. So under drums and unpitched metals, these are the only two I'm using right now. Just got single hits, right? Now there are some really nice pitched percussion here. Timpani, tubular bells, glockenspiel. The thing is that pitched percussion really is handled just like pitched instruments. It's no different from the strings or the brass in terms of how the expression map works. The expression map controls dynamics, and then it's different articulations are being sent out channels. Okay, so I'm not going to cover, I'm not going to provide a unique video just about pitched percussion because it functions basically the same as what we've already discussed with winds and brass and strings. But percussion is totally unique because when we look at the single hits here, what we see is that there's a range of keys. These aren't key switches. They're not switching between articulations. These keys are actually assigned to unique samples. So one key is a snare and one key is a bass drum. It might be one's a soft mallet, one's a hard mallet, but each key is actually a sound, not a collection of sounds. Whereas a key in a violin library is a collection of velocity layers and round robins and all the rest. Here, it's an instrument. There's a key that is for snare. So which keys? Well, each one of these has a unique one. So bass drum has a unique key, snare has a unique key, and suspended cymbal has a unique key. These all three need to be on their own port so I can address them uniquely. Let's go look at how I have the expression map, or percussion map rather, set up. Now, in a percussion instrument, there is an expression map. I'll get into that in just a second. Let's see, we've got bass drum, a natural, which is essentially a hit. Then we've got snare drum hit and suspended cymbal hit. And these are triggered by keys C2, C3, and A3. Okay, so you have to just learn those. Sometimes they're documented in documentation from your library. Other times I actually click into the view here and I find out which key plays what I want to hear, and then I identify, okay, that's D3 or D2 or whatever it is, and then I know what I need to put into my expression map. So let's see, how did I get here? How did I get these three records? Well, right now, I don't see all the other notes that are available. Obviously, I could assign something to C1 if I wanted. How do I get there? I click on this Show All, and now I can see all the keys, and I can go and find C1 right here, and then I can select the instrument. So let's say that this was a bongo, a high bongo. And let's say that it is, I'm just going to say natural, which is the same as just a hit, right? Could be left hand, or right hand. You'll see there's nothing up here yet until I click on this apply button down here. So let me go ahead and do that again. Bongo high. And technique was natural. Oh, I'm sorry. I got confused there. I'm zoomed in and I'm not looking at my own stuff. So let me go ahead and make sure that I'm not getting confused. So let's say I go to C1 again, and I wanted this to be a bongo. I don't need to provide name, and I don't need to provide key switches here in this instance. So I'm just going to go with bongo, high, and then natural. And then I hit apply. And now, if I were to create a track in Dorico that was a bongo high, and I were to execute a note on that percussion staff, it would send out a note C1. Now, I'm just using this as a demo. I'm not sure that there's anything actually there, right? But that's how I set up these other ones. You can choose between showing all or just showing MIDI notes that are in use. These are the ones that I've already set up. All right. And then you come in over here, and I have notes set up. There's my bass drum, and there's my snare, and there's my suspended cymbal. So these are sending out the exact MIDI note, out the exact MIDI port. The MIDI channel here is basically always channel 1. But if I had different articulations that I wanted to support, maybe tremolo, like a roll, or crescendos, decrescendos, things like that, I could assign those as bass switches, being that they're unique articulations, and then assign them each a unique channel. Let's talk a little bit, just before I finish up the video here, going back to the spreadsheet, which I've been using all along. Let's say we're in percussion here, and I've got my bass drum on port 1, and my snare drum on port 2, my suspended cymbal on port 3, you know, I maybe have my bongo high on 4, bongo low on 5, my djembe on 6, whatever you want to do. It's really up to you how you configure it. And I'm hoping that you can also see as we move through these lessons that documenting, starting with a spreadsheet like this to document what your instrument families are, how you're assigning the ports, what instruments you're going to need in this collective ensemble. And then identifying your bass switches, what channels do they get? How are you switching between the conditional articulations like long, very long, medium, so on and so forth. We've talked about that in one of the past videos. Getting all that configured on paper is really helpful so that you don't accidentally send two things to the wrong port. You know, maybe you have by mistake, you have natural and legato notes both going to channel 1. That would get very unreliable results. If you start with the plan and you fill out this spreadsheet or something like it, articulate your ideas, collect all the details about your ensemble to begin with before you actually get into building endpoint projects, before you get into building expression maps or percussion maps, or even loading instruments into Vienna Ensemble Pro, you're going to be way better off. You just have this printed out, you look at it, writing your expression map. It's time consuming, but it's just a matter of time. That's it. You don't have to hold a bunch of stuff in your head and make guesses, okay? So I'm hoping that this has illuminated the differences between percussion maps and expression maps, how they fit in to this channel switching methodology that I use. And you can see with just a few examples here, the bass drum, snare, and cymbal, how that's been configured exactly. But of course, Berlin Free Orchestra is limited. Their percussion is particularly limited. So if you have a broader library, obviously you're going to need more complicated percussion maps. And things do get more complicated, of course, because we want the best sounding mock-ups we can possibly get, and we buy the most advanced possible libraries that we can afford. That's all down the road. I definitely think it's a good idea when you're learning this stuff to start simple and then just build as you need to. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. If you have questions about this or any of the others in this series, please do just post in the comments. If there's something you want me to cover that I haven't, please let me know. If you're new to my channel, I do live stream a couple of times a week, and then I also publish videos like this on Dorico workflow and Cubase workflow. I'm a professional composer, so that's what I do, and I would be grateful if you can help me surface these videos to a larger audience by liking and subscribing, and of course leave comments if you have questions. Until next time, I'll see you in the next episode of this series coming soon.